On August 12, 2007, motorcycle enthusiasts across Europe were making their way home from one of the biggest biker festivals on the continent. The Bulldog Bash had been a huge success. For 4 days, thousands of bikers had gathered for music, racing, entertainment, and the culture surrounding the motorcycle world. But, for one man, the journey home would become his final ride. His name was Jerry Tobin. To his friends, he was known as Gentleman Jerry. He was 35 years old. He was a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. And on that August afternoon, he was riding home on the M40 motorway as part of a small convoy. He had no idea that another group of bikers was watching him. No idea that a car was approaching from behind. And no idea that within seconds his life would be over. What followed was a murder that police would eventually connect to a bitter rivalry between two motorcycle clubs. A murder the judge would later describe as totally pointless, because Jerry wasn't killed over a personal dispute. He wasn't killed because his attackers knew him. He was killed because he belonged to a different motorcycle club. The 4-day Bulldog Bash generated profits of more than £1 million for the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club in 2007. But the event hadn't always been that large. It began in 1987 as a relatively small gathering. Over the years, it grew. By 2007, it had become one of the largest motorcycle festivals in Europe. That year, a record 50,000 people attended. The formula was simple. The festival was organized by bikers for bikers. There was live rock music, beer tents, motorcycle racing, drag racing, and stunt riding demonstrations. There was also adult entertainment, including wet t-shirt contests, erotic dance shows, and a topless bike wash. For the people attending, it was a celebration of motorcycle culture. Behind the entertainment, was a much more complicated world. The world of motorcycle clubs. And among the clubs attending the Bulldog Bash were members of the Hells Angels. For Jerry Tobin, the event was simply part of a weekend, surrounded by people who shared his passion for motorcycles. But when the festival ended, Jerry started his journey home. He would never make it. On Sunday, August 12, 2007, Hells Angels members and other motorcycle enthusiasts began leaving the Bulldog Bash. Among them was Jerry Tobin. His friends knew him as Gentleman Jerry. He was 35 years old. Jerry had been born in Mansfield and had immigrated to Canada as a boy. But he didn't fit the stereotype that many people might have imagined when they heard the words Hells Angel. While living in Calgary, Canada, Jerry had led Bible studies in his home. At one point, he had even considered becoming a missionary. Eventually, Jerry returned to England during the 1990s with his fiancée, Becky Smith. He was enjoying his life. He worked as a mechanic at a local Harley-Davidson dealership. He spent time with fellow Hells Angels, and he was deeply involved in the motorcycle world. To the people who knew him, Jerry was much more than the patch on his jacket. He was described as loving, hardworking, loyal, and respected. He was a man of his word, someone who stood up for his principles, someone who cared about other people. His membership in the Hells Angels was, according to those who knew him, a natural extension of his passion for motorcycles and the people who shared that passion. But on that afternoon, Jerry's membership would make him a target. Jerry was riding along the M40 motorway at the head of a convoy of 3 bikers. Behind him was a man who was hoping to join the Hells Angels, but had not yet been accepted into the gang. As he rode, the man looked into his mirror. A dark green car was approaching rapidly from behind. He moved into the middle lane to let it pass. The vehicle was a Green Rover 620. It raced past the bikers. Then, something strange happened. Instead of continuing on, the Rover slowed down. Its speed began matching the speed of Jerry's motorcycle at the front of the group. The rider watching from behind had no idea what was about to happen. Then, as the convoy approached Junction 12 for Leamington Spa, the passenger windows of the Rover opened. Guns appeared, and shots were fired. For a moment, it appeared as though Jerry hadn't been hit. But only 2 or 3 seconds later, the rider behind him watched in horror. Jerry let go of his handlebars. His body fell, and his motorcycle continued moving beneath him. The first bullet had smashed through the mudguard of Jerry's bike and into the rear wheel. Another bullet skimmed the base of his helmet. It lodged in his skull, and it killed him instantly. Jerry's body fell face down onto the tarmac near the central reservation. His motorcycle continued for another 200 meters before veering off onto the grass verge. He was only 35 years old, and he died there on the motorway, in broad daylight. The attack had been quick, but investigators would soon discover that it had not been random. The investigation began immediately. Police had a crucial piece of evidence. CCTV footage had captured the Green Rover from which the shots had been fired. The question was simple: who owned the car? The vehicle was eventually found burned out on a back street in Coventry, but investigators were able to trace the Rover back to its owner. The owner was Sean C., and using their own vehicle for the murder wasn't the only mistake the attackers had made. They had also been captured on CCTV at a petrol station. There was something unusual about the people in the footage. They were wearing winter clothing. It was August. The attempt to disguise themselves had actually made them stand out. The same cameras also captured Jerry. He was looking up and smiling, completely unaware that he was about to be murdered. The footage would become another important piece of evidence in the investigation. But investigators still needed to understand the reason behind the killing. Who was Sean C., and why would someone want Jerry Tobin dead? The answer led police into the world of rival motorcycle clubs. The man police identified as being connected to the murder was Sean Creighton. Creighton was a senior figure in a rival motorcycle club, the Outlaws. Police believed the shooting was the latest chapter in a long-running rivalry between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels. According to investigators, the murder was believed to have been retaliation for a previous incident. And there was another important detail. The Bulldog Bash itself was taking place in an area regarded by the Outlaws as their territory. Long Marston, near Stratford-upon-Avon, was seen as territory controlled by the Outlaws and the South Warwickshire chapter, run by Sean Creighton. The location of the Hells Angels' annual event was therefore viewed as deliberately provocative. The rivalry between the two motorcycle clubs had begun with a series of brutal murders in North America during the late 1960s. Over time, the conflict spread to other parts of the world. Britain was no exception. There had already been incidents involving the two clubs, and police had warned about the potential dangers surrounding the Bulldog Bash. Warwickshire police had previously detailed incidents connected to the motorcycle clubs. One incident stood out. In 1998, the Outlaws made a specific threat to bomb the Bulldog Bash. Police and event organizers took that threat seriously. Then, on August 12, 2001, a Hells Angel member was shot on the A40 while leaving the Bulldog Bash. The attack was disturbingly similar to the one that would later kill Jerry. The injured man was shot 3 times in the leg. He survived. The incident was treated as attempted murder. But the injured Hells Angel refused to make a formal complaint to police, following the Hells Angels code of not speaking to the authorities. The conflict continued. And 6 years later, Jerry Tobin would become another victim. The investigation into Jerry's death continued, and detectives eventually discovered something that changed the case completely. The murder had not been improvised. The plan had allegedly been in place for months. According to the investigation, members of the South Warwickshire Outlaws had discussed the killing at their Christmas party. The meeting reportedly took place at an Art Deco watering hole on the outskirts of Coventry. Among those gathered were senior figures within the chapter: the president, the sergeant-at-arms, and the treasurer. They were allegedly planning the death of a rival gang member. But there was a disturbing detail. Jerry Tobin wasn't specifically selected because of a personal feud. The plan was reportedly aimed at a Hells Angel, any Hells Angel. Jerry happened to become the target. The chapter's president was 4-year-old Sean Creighton. Investigators believed he had fired the fatal shot. 3 days before the murder, Creighton had reportedly begun target practice on a dummy at his home. The planning didn't stop there. Members of the gang began monitoring bikers heading toward the Bulldog Bash. They were looking for a Hells Angel to target. Then, Jerry rode onto the motorway, and the plan was put into motion. Jerry was riding his Harley-Davidson along the motorway. Behind him was the convoy. Then, the Green Rover accelerated. It moved alongside Jerry. The driver maneuvered the car into position, and Sean Creighton and another outlaw, Simon Turner, opened fire. The attack had support. Nearby, so-called Dog's Body probationers were acting as backup. They were traveling in a white Range Rover in case the initial plan failed. Another gang member was also patrolling nearby in a Renault Laguna. The murder was not simply 2 men deciding to attack someone in the moment. According to the investigation, multiple people were involved in the operation, and once the shooting was complete, the plan continued. Minutes after the murder, the occupants of the Rover ordered their 2 support units to stand down. They sped back toward the Coventry area. The Rover was then set alight in a country lane. The vehicle that had carried the killers was destroyed. But the investigators had already begun putting the pieces together. So, who were the men involved? One of them was Dane Garrett. Garrett was the driver of the Rover. He had only recently been awarded the black and yellow insignia of the Outlaws. That marked him as a fully patched member. Garrett was 42 years old. He was a lorry driver, and he was a father of 7. He had wanted to become an outlaw biker since he was 13. He even had the Grim Reaper emblem of another motorcycle club, Satan's Slaves, tattooed on his head in anticipation of the day he would be accepted into the motorcycle fraternity. He also had the word warrior tattooed on his head. Then there was Simon Turner. Turner was the other gunman. He worked as a mechanic at a motorcycle shop in Coventry that reportedly acted as an unofficial clubhouse for members. His tattoos stretched down his arms and around his neck, and Turner was no stranger to violence. In 1993, he had been jailed for 10 years for grievous bodily harm. The offense involved stabbing and throwing petrol over a man he had never met before. The reason? The man owed money to a friend. Turner later attempted to explain his actions by saying that he needed the money to buy Christmas presents for his children. He described throwing petrol over the man as nothing more than a scare tactic. But years later, Turner would again find himself involved in a violent crime. This time, the victim would not survive. The case eventually reached Birmingham Crown Court. Sean Craton pleaded guilty to the killing. The evidence against him was overwhelming. But police suspected that there was another reason for his guilty plea. They believed he may have been attempting to protect his chapter of the Outlaws. The other members involved in the case maintained their innocence. The trial lasted 9 weeks. One member of the gang even jeered at Jerry's mother during the hearing. The behavior was a stark contrast to the way Jerry himself had been remembered. He had been described by friends as a loving, loyal, hard-working, and respected man. A man who cared about other people. A man who was well-liked by those around him. The lack of respect shown toward his family during the trial made the tragedy even more painful. Eventually, the defendants were convicted of murder and related firearms offenses. The evidence had established a planned attack. A rivalry between 2 motorcycle clubs had resulted in the death of a man who, according to the judge, had done nothing to deserve it. At sentencing, all 7 defendants stood together in the dock. They were handcuffed. Outside the court, around 100 fellow outlaws waited in support. Armed police officers kept a watchful eye on the situation. Then the sentences were handed down. Sean Craton was told he would serve a minimum of 28.5 years. Simon Turner received a minimum of 30 years. Dane Garrett received 27 years. The remaining defendants received sentences of at least 25 years. The judge described the killing in devastating terms. An innocent man had been executed with a firearm, in broad daylight, on a busy motorway. And there was one reason given for why Jerry had been targeted. He belonged to a different motorcycle club. He was a stranger to the men who killed him. There was no personal dispute between them. No meaningful reason for his death. The judge emphasized the pointlessness of the crime, and the lack of remorse shown by those responsible. None of them, the judge said, had shown the remotest feeling, consideration, or remorse for what they had done. For years, Jerry Tobin wore the distinctive insignia of the Hells Angels with pride. He was part of a motorcycle culture he loved. He worked as a mechanic. He spent time with his friends. He was a loving partner to Becky. And by all accounts presented in the original story, he was a man who was deeply liked and respected. But on August 12, 2007, none of that mattered to the men who targeted him. They didn't need to know Jerry. They didn't need a personal reason to hate him. To them, his affiliation was enough. He was a Hell's Angel, and that made him a target. The attack was carried out in broad daylight, on a busy motorway, as Jerry rode home from a motorcycle festival. He had no warning. The Green Rover approached. The guns appeared. The shots were fired. And within seconds, Jerry was dead. The investigation eventually revealed that the killing had been planned months in advance. There were multiple people involved. There were support vehicles. There was surveillance. There was target practice. And there was an attempt to destroy the getaway car. But the attackers left behind evidence. CCTV captured the Green Rover. Cameras captured the suspects at a petrol station. And the vehicle itself was traced back to its owner. The investigation ultimately led to convictions. and the sentences reflected the seriousness of the crime. But no sentence could change what had happened on that motorway. Jerry Tobin was 35 years old. He was a son, a partner, a friend, a mechanic, a motorcycle enthusiast, and, to those who knew him, a gentleman. His death wasn't the result of a personal feud. It wasn't the result of a chance encounter. It was the result of a rivalry that had turned deadly. And perhaps the most disturbing part of the entire case is exactly what the judge said. Jerry was killed for no reason other than belonging to a different motorcycle club. A completely pointless murder. A life taken simply because of a patch. And that is what makes the murder of Gentleman Jerry Tobin so difficult to forget.